Welcome, everybody. This is Debbie from the Academy for Adults with Autism speaking. Rosemary Luger is our speaker tonight. Rosemary is an occupational therapist. If you have any questions, you may enter them into the chat box. If there isn't time to answer or a lengthy discussion is needed, then please keep your question post your question into the Google link that I've put in the chat box. And that will be kept for the 4th of May. So this session is occupation, structure, routine, and environment. Just another point. If by any chance Zoom does cut us off, please rejoin the meeting using the link, or just join the meeting and we'll start it up again. That does happen sometimes. Okay, we still have a few people coming in, and I just need to check if they're muting as they come in. All right. So I'm going to tell you a bit about Rosemary, and then I'm going to hand over to Rosemary. Rosemary qualified as an occupational therapist at UCT in 2001 and obtained her master's degree in human rehabilitation studies at Stellenbosch University in 2016. Much of her career has been spent working for non-profit organizations supporting children and adults with disabilities. Rosemary is also involved with postgraduate and undergraduate training of health sciences students. She is passionate about the rights of persons with disabilities to be included in their communities and to access the services they require to participate fully in society. Rosemary has experience in early identification and intervention for young children with autism, as well as facilitation of appropriate preschool and primary school transitions for older children. Her work with adults with autism has focused on occupational enrichment groups and therapeutic routines in residential settings, including at the Academy for Adults with Autism. While she acknowledges that professionals can have an important part to play, Rosemary believes that the spaces in which people live and work and the people with whom they interact on a daily basis are the true facilitators of well-being, and so regularly works at a systematic level, creating therapeutic environments alongside persons with disabilities, their families, and communities. Thank you, Rosemary. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie, for the introduction, and a good evening to each of you. I'm so glad that you could join me for this session on occupation, structure, routine, and environment, all of which are topics I'm sure you are to some degree familiar with and are probably already using to an extent. So I've tried to draw together some relevant practical information and tips from websites representing the autism community, courses I've attended, my professional background as an OT, and the people with autism and their caregivers who I've worked with. So let's get started by looking at occupation. And occupation from an OT perspective includes work, leisure, and activities of daily living. For adults with autism who usually go out to work, I think the restrictions and changes necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic have really highlighted the important role that productive activity plays when they were no longer able to do that. For those adults who are not yet able to go back into their previous work, or for those who do not usually work, it remains important to have adult roles and responsibilities in the residential setting. This is an area that is sometimes difficult for young adults and their families to negotiate, as it can seem better or easier just to continue the patterns developed during childhood. But from what I have seen, once a step is taken to include adults with autism in adult roles, where there are expectations and accountability to contribute around the house, their self-esteem and skills really develop. So my first suggestion is if families or caregivers are still doing all the shopping, cooking, this is a long list, budgeting, cleaning, laundry, gardening, travel arrangements, health management, communicating, and home maintenance for the adults with autism in their lives. Discuss and see what activities can they start participating in to contribute to the running of the home. And slowly, as they get used to things or as they develop extra skills, see what increased roles and responsibilities they can take on to assist. Then when it comes to leisure, like we always say with children, real play has to be free and non-directed. True leisure for adults is also self-directed, and it should be chosen by them based on their interests and what will regulate and energize their systems. So yes, there's a time for organized activities, and as an OT, that's often where I come in. But if it is you or the OT always imposing your ideas on what the adult with autism would enjoy or should enjoy, that's then more like work for them rather than leisure. So my second suggestion is to let adults with autism take the lead in terms of what leisure activities they choose to do, so that they enjoy the real benefit of leisure. Whether it be swinging, drawing, doing puzzles, playing a computer game, whatever it is that energizes them and is a stress reliever. And then finally, looking at activities of daily living. These include things like hygiene, dressing, toileting, moving around, and eating. And many adults with autism or people with autism take a long time to learn these skills, and it can be tempting just to do things for them to get it done quickly. And maybe you also worry about that they're not doing it to as good a quality as you want. But I know from speaking to many parents of adults with autism, one of their real concerns is who's going to take care of their child when they pass on, or even who's going to be around to look after and care for their child if they need to go away for a short time. So my third suggestion is to really focus and take small steps towards increasing the independence and activities of daily living of adults with autism in your lives, so that their dependence on others will be reduced, which will be good for them and also a relief, hopefully, for you as parents and caregivers. And then this slide is just to remind us that a good quality of life requires occupational balance. And this is for you as well as your adults with autism in your life. So too much work or too much time spent on activities of daily living, or even too much free leisure time, is not helpful. So please be mindful of occupational balance and be guided by your needs and the needs of the adults with autism in your life to try and find a good fit. And that's not easy, I know, but try and negotiate that good fit in your context, and everyone's context is different. And remember, it's not selfish of you to take time to pursue your leisure activities. You need to refresh and relax, because as a caregiver, you can't give your best and function optimally if you are fatigued or burnt out. In the short term, it's going to be extra difficult to be patient and to give the structure and the routine that the adults with autism need. And in the long term, you do risk mental and physical health conditions developing if you're chronically tired and burnt out. All right, so structure and routine are really important. And some of the things that I've spoken to can be assisted through structure and routine and implementing that in daily life. So I'm sure all of you know, we all use structure and routine to decrease stress and energy demands. A lot of things we just do in the day, we don't even think about, we don't have to plan for, we just like on automatic pilot. And I realized this, what really struck me during lockdown, that suddenly when all my normal routines, all my normal structures had disappeared, I felt so inefficient. I seemed to be doing so little, and I was so tired because I couldn't rely on those everyday things that I just normally fit into and that I can go into automatic pilot on. So coming to the adults with autism, we all know how difficult it is for many adults with autism to cope with transitions and the anxiety that uncertainty and unpredictability can have. So structures and routine are especially important for them. And tonight I just want to highlight a few that draw on harnessing on the strengths of adults with autism. Often strengths are things like their enhanced visuospatial skills, their ability to focus, their eye for detail, their creativity, their ability to find unique solutions to problems, and also always thinking the best of other people. So setting up structures and routines that work for them rather than expecting them to fit into the structures and routines of neurotypical people is something that can be really helpful. And again, everyone's unique and each context is different. So trial and error will be necessary to work out exactly what will work in your situation. And also over time, what used to work may no longer work. And I think often we see this as failure, but expect that there will need to be reevaluation and adjustment over time as the adult matures and things change. So just a few strategies, and the first one is the visual schedules. And just a few tips regarding that, if you are not using those yet, try and use the natural routines that occur. So in most settings, we brush our teeth after we've had breakfast. But also bear in mind when everyone has the most energy. Some people are morning people, some people are evening people. So be aware of you and the adult with autism. When is their energy high? Bear in mind what other responsibilities you have. When do other people need attention in the house? So that the daily schedule fits into the natural kind of rhythm of your family's lives. We don't want it to make it's supposed to make everyone's lives easier, not more difficult. And then for some adults with autism, they might need photos of the actual activities. For others, they might manage with sketches of activities, or others just words as a prompt to remind them and to reassure them about the order that activities are going to occur during that day. And then just things that are usually included in visual schedules are things like eating times, dressing and grooming, medication times, leisure activities, productive activity slots, and sleep times. And then just Debbie mentioned that sleep is often a challenge. So a predictable routine leading up to sleep, like you can create through a visual schedule, is a really important part of sleep hygiene and can be very effective. Another strategy that is sometimes suggested if adults with autism or anyone is having sleep problems is to try and darken the room during that build up to bedtime, so that the melatonin levels can rise. So to assist the person to start feeling tired. But also then on the other hand, for some people being in the dark is quite anxiety provoking. So it's going to again be dependent on the person in your life. And then also just remember visual schedules are also good for weekends, and they'll probably need a different visual schedule for that. And then as much as a routine is helpful, a meaningful life also needs some variety and some special events. And these can be anxiety provoking, but to get the most out of these new experiences, it's really important to prepare the adult with autism for any celebrations that are coming up or outings. And again, these can be explained using pictures and words about when the social time or outing will happen, who's it going to be with, where is it going to be. And it's nice to have some concrete information. So maybe you can Google some pictures or look on a map, where's it going to be, where they're going to go, to try and reduce some of the anxiety around this new thing. And then of course, life also happens, and sometimes there are changes that have to occur because bad things have happened. And again, preparation as far as possible in an appropriate and given appropriate explanations can help reduce the distress of changes because of divorce or death or ill health. All right, and then moving on to the third bullet here, consistent expectations are really important, and responses to behavior. from those who interact with the adults, and preferably from all the people who interact with the adult is the most helpful. And this is going to necessitate communication between various people. And we need to just remember, not in earshot of the adult with autism, unless they've been really included and are part of the discussion and are being affirmed in that discussion rather than being talked about in a negative way. And then in line with that, also just remember the importance of regular affirmation. Adults with autism have high rates of depression and anxiety and low self-esteem and self-confidence. And often these don't manifest in exactly the same way as we expect. So often these are missed. So if we're mindful of regularly being affirming, that can be helpful. All right, and just a few more, a bit more on structure and routine. One of the big things is to keep verbal instructions simple, and then also try visual sequencing. So breaking up activities into pictures or written steps really assists, especially with learning new tasks. So for example, making tea, often we just do it, or but it can really help to break it down into all the different steps. And if you think through it, there are a lot of steps involved. So we need to fill the kettle with water, we need to turn on the kettle, we need to put the tea bag in the cup, we need to add the boiling water, we need to stir, we need to add milk, and then we need to drink it. And if you can break up that activity into the steps, it often just supports that learning while during that skill acquisition stage. And then time is a really abstract concept, and it's often a challenge for adults with autism to understand. So you'll see in the picture there are a few examples of some timers, and for some that works quite well, that they can see visually how long until something is going to happen, or how long until they can stop doing something that they've been asked to do. Consider timers sometimes. And then just also my inclination as an OT is always to talk about what's happening, and maybe to use calendars. And Debbie, when I came in to the Academy with Autism, actually said to me, sometimes if you plan too far ahead, that waiting period can cause unnecessary stress. So also be mindful of when you give information about upcoming dates and times. For some, it might not be a problem, and you can talk them through what's going to happen a few weeks or a few months in advance. But for some, it might need to be a much shorter waiting period. And then linked to waiting, also waiting in things like queues, waiting for a meal, waiting for another person to stop talking can be a real struggle. And a few tips around that, sometimes just the deep breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth can help, or counting slowly with the adult with autism helps them to calm and to wait when it is necessary to wait in a public space or in the home environment. And then again, visual prompts. So especially for more advanced tasks, if you're looking at finances or some work tasks, using color-coded things or different files to indicate the importance or urgency of different tasks can be useful. So everything in the red tray are things that need to be done today. The things in the green tray can be done tomorrow. So if you get to them, that's great, but it's not a problem if you don't. For those who are literate, lists can be written down, activities noted on the calendar, and then crossed off as a very concrete confirmation that the activity has been completed. And then lastly, auditory prompts. So the adult can leave themselves messages on cell phones and smartphones these days, and WhatsApp are really nice. So they can send themselves messages or reminders, set alarms on their phones, and also can be sent a message to just remind them about something upcoming that's urgent, or when a deadline is. So technology and those auditory prompts using voice notes and things can be very supportive of participation. All right, and then moving on to the last section for tonight is about how to create autism-friendly environments. And I read quite a lot on websites written by adults with autism that they do experience the world quite differently. And this can be both debilitating and it can be empowering. So the aim of creating autism-friendly environments is to reduce the negative effects of their sensory processing differences, especially the distress that often is experienced in a neurotypical world, and to enhance the positive effects to maximize their performance and their participation. So I'm going to start by going through the 5 commonly known senses, so vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, and then move on to the 2 lesser known ones, but often in autism are also really important. So thinking about proprioception, thinking about vestibular, and thinking about interoception. Again, because every adult with autism has different hyper and hypersensitivities to sensory information, it's important that we focus on the individual and what their preferences are and what their sensory profile is. But it's hoped that some of these general guidelines will be a helpful starting point, or maybe you could try with your adult with autism based on your knowledge of them and what is distressing for them and where their strengths are and what helps them. So starting with the visual system, many adults with autism are particularly observant of every single detail, and they can become overwhelmed by all this visual information and not be able to process it effectively. So bear in mind that fluorescent lights and flickering lights can be very distracting or debilitating. And the different colors have different effects. So red and yellow are often, they stimulate us. So if you want to get some alertness, those are maybe colors to think about. Light blues can calm the mind and aid concentration. So I tried to find a PowerPoint slide theme that was light blue. This was as best I could get to try and keep everyone calm or keep me calm to aid your concentration. And then green can be restful. So if you're painting walls or thinking about different clothes or accessories, think color sometimes can play a role. And then also try and declutter rooms and walls to reduce that visual clutter, which we just filter out and our brains learn to ignore. But people with autism often, their brains don't shut off and they're seeing everything all the time, which then makes it difficult for them to know what visual information to attend to. And then on a similar vein, pattern fabrics can apparently also be very distracting and overwhelming and can even cause visual distortion. So even thinking about what clothes we wear or what clothes they wear or what the furniture is covered with or bedding can potentially, if you make it plain, it might make things calmer. And then when some adults with autism are really sensitive to the sunlight, so wearing a cap, wearing sunglasses when out in sunshine can sometimes block that overwhelming brightness. And then moving on to the auditory system, adults with autism tell us that they usually hear sounds louder and struggle to filter out unimportant noises. So I think Deborah alluded to her patient who couldn't handle the inconsistency between her 2 clocks, the ticking, where most of us don't even hear the clock in either of the clocks in the first place. So being aware of, what are the sounds of the clocks? Is the fridge humming? Is there unnecessary music or television noise that can be turned off to reduce that distraction and to aid concentration? But also then to be aware that sometimes music chosen by the adult with autism, there might be specific music that actually does help them to concentrate. So it's quite subtle what can be distracting and what can facilitate concentration. And it involves a bit of detective work. Parents and the person with autism can often figure it out by themselves. If you're having difficulty, an OT can also assist with sensory profile screening or assessment. And then also even our tone of voice. So if noise is heightened, we need to be aware of maybe speaking a little bit softer, using a lowish tone, as loud, high-pitched voices can sound painful even. And then also to reduce external sounds that can seem deafening. So things like traffic or children playing outside, building works, which we block out, can be very intrusive. So see, can you close doors and windows, or do would earplugs, or even now you get amazing noise cancelling headphones, would that help to block out those overwhelming external noises, which can be distressing? And then when considering the tactile environment, touch and pressure variations need to be considered to avoid distress. And there's often a mixture of seeking tactile input, but also avoiding it. So things like clothes, I'm sure you've all found already what clothes your adult with autism feels comfortable in, and that often cutting out the labels can help. And for those who are sensory seeking, so that they need that extra sensory stimulation to be alert and to be calm, things like sensory boxes, having different textures available for them to feel, to hold, having things in a pocket or somewhere to go where they can feel soft things or rough things or smooth things or whatever it is that is calming for them. And then also to be aware of respecting individuals who don't wish to be touched. And often it's around, if they have control over it, they seek out that touch and hugs and things like that, but they often don't like people coming into their space and initiating that. So to be sensitive to that. But if there is a need to escort them somewhere, or there's a safety issue, often holding them around the waist from the side is a non-confrontational and a low arousal approach. If you do need if you do require touch to move them to a different position, for safety reasons. And then deep pressure is usually calming, and light touch is often irritating. So things that you can use for deep pressure are things like a wooden massager or brushing, a firm massage with 2 fingers down the spine, a weighted blanket. So sometimes those things can be quite effective, especially in preparation for maybe a task that's going to be a bit challenging, or where more concentration is going to be required, or you're going to need to learn a new skill. And then smell. When considering smell, adults with autism tell us that certain smells can be so offensive that they actually cause severe nausea. So we need to be aware of reducing overwhelming smells. If the smell's from outside, closing doors and windows to keep it outside. If it's coming from inside, opening doors and windows to get rid of the smell as quickly as possible. And they say that the sense of smell, often they can smell things even that were there a long time ago, so that sort of stays offensive for longer than we would expect, even if you've got rid of the offending smell. And then to be aware of avoiding offensive smelling cleaning products or perfumes or food. And that's again going to be dependent on each person's sensory profile and preferences. Okay, moving on to taste. So when considering
Rosemary, so
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, just to say we have about 3.5 more minutes on this. We just had a warning. So just to let everybody know, if we do cut off, please rejoin, because we can continue the discussion for about 10 more minutes or so. Okay. Sorry to interrupt, Rosemary.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so when considering taste variations, it's important to be mindful that meals should be a pleasant experience. And so we want it to be a pleasant experience. We don't want it to be a fight. But we also need to be mindful of the importance of healthy eating and the negative effects of an unhealthy diet. So it is always a balancing act. So just some thoughts. So give flavor choices between various nutritious options. And then something that I hadn't really thought of, be alert that it might not be the taste that's the problem or that's causing someone to refuse to eat something. It might be the texture of the food or how it even looks. So experiment with different ways of presenting the same food to see if you can widen the number of food options just by presenting them in a different way or cooking them in a different way. And so moving on to the vestibular system then. Adults with autism tell us that they really struggle with balance and coordination, and that movement helps them to gain a sense of themselves. So that's why the swinging, the balancing on beams or boards, climbing, jumping on trampolines, that is why that is so regulating and so helpful for a lot of people with autism. It's almost that movement, that vestibular movement, helps them to get a sense of who they are and where their bodies are. I'm wondering if I should stop there, Debbie, so we don't get cut off in the middle of a section, or should we just keep trying?
It's about just over a minute still, so
okay. Well, let me keep going.
Continue. Yes, very
Okay.
interesting. Yeah.
All right, and then proprioception. So proprioception is our sense of self relative to other things. And adults with autism report that they sometimes struggle to get a sense of themselves in relation to the physical world around them, and they can feel quite overwhelmed in especially busy and small spaces. And I think we often see that that's where a lot of the real difficulties lie, in busy shopping centers or in confined spaces. It's often quite a distressing environment. So a few tips, strategies, sometimes just having a wall behind them or a chair behind them that they can physically feel where their body is, so their body is touching something behind them, or having a surface or a table in front. Again, that helps them it gives them a clue about where their body is relative to other things in space. Also being aware of positioning them so that they can see what is happening around them and where sounds are coming from. So having them look out into the open rather than have their backs maybe to a doorway or a corridor where people are walking. And then creating open spaces between furniture to allow for easy exit and to avoid injuries, especially if they do become distressed and need to leave. Yes. Can I go ahead?
I think go ahead, yeah. Thank you.
All right, so we were so close to the end, but it is important. This last one, interoception, is often something that we don't think about, and I think not a lot is known about it yet. But the interoception is around the awareness and understanding of messages being sent to and from our bodies. And some of the things that adults with autism are telling us are that they do not always know how to stay at a comfortable temperature, and that sometimes being praised or sort of feeling intense emotions can actually cause pain. And that's to do with kind of not that sort of perception of not knowing or not reading the body signs as neurotypical people. So the first thing is just to be aware of, and I know Debbie also talks about this a lot, is to assist with avoiding overheating or hypothermia. So thinking about what clothes the adult with autism is wearing, what is the temperature of foods and drinks, and also what's the ambient temperature. They may not be able to regulate and have such a good sense of how their body temperature is and what they should be doing to stay at a comfortable temperature where they can concentrate and function well. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other, this emotional overload was something quite new to me that I read up a bit about. And it's again about the different responses to how they are treated. So sometimes around eye contact, insisting that they make eye contact, I think, is becoming a little bit of a controversial issue. And being very emotional, praising in a way that they find uncomfortable. And obviously this is very different and very individual, but just to be aware of how they respond when we behave and give them feedback in different ways, and to try and modify how we react and interact with them to avoid distress again. All right, so that's all our 8 senses. So just some concluding thoughts to sort of summarize what I've talked about tonight. So the first thing is to presume competence. encourage engagement in productive activities, independence in activities of daily living as much as possible. And then don't forget the importance of leisure for everyone, not just for the adult with autism, for yourselves as well. Consistency, be consistent as much as possible. And then see what you can do to create a more autism-friendly environment. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. And I'd also love to hear if you have any tips to share with me and the other parents and caregivers from your own experiences, which are always so valuable, your lived experience. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can see if there are any questions.
Right, so if anyone has any questions, Leanne has said, thank you, Rosemary. That was very interesting and in-depth, and I can certainly relate to the information that was shared in our experience with young adults with autism and older adults and teenagers as well.